I woke up one morning and discovered that someone had stolen not my car, not my keys, but the one thing that made my life possible: my parking spot. That line grabbed people's attention the first time I told the story at a neighborhood meeting. And I'm starting there because if you don't feel that shock right away, nothing that follows will land the way it should. My name is Ahmed. I'm 42, I use a motorized wheelchair, and I live in Parkview Estates, a tidy little HOA community with perfectly trimmed hedges and a rules binder that everyone pretends to read. I have lived here for 3 years, and the spot right outside my building is officially assigned to me because it's the accessible space closest to the ramp. Simple, legal, obvious, until it wasn't. At first it was small things: a car lingering, idling for 10 minutes while a woman on crutches dialed her phone in the shade. Another time, a delivery van half-blocking the space with a driver who shrugged at me and said, "Be quick." I asked politely every time. I remember that first polite exchange like it was yesterday. I rolled up, tapped on the passenger window, and said, "Hi, that's my spot. Can you move over a little?" The man looked surprised, then apologetic, and reversed. End of story, I thought. But then she arrived in our lives. The woman everyone secretly calls Karen. She's late 40s, styled hair, oversized sunglasses even on cloudy days. She dresses like she's immune to weather, like she has an invisible but very expensive spa membership. She moved into the building 3 months after I did and immediately started showing us her personality. At first, people joked about her energy, the way she clipped down neighborly suggestions like she was trimming the hedges herself. "She's just passionate," someone said. "She cares," said another person. But there's caring, and then there's control. The first time she parked in my spot, I almost let it slide. She had a kid's stroller, a dog in a designer carrier, and a look that implied the universe had obligated the spot to her. I tapped her window and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, that's my accessible spot. It's reserved." She clicked the window open and smiled like she was giving me a lesson. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, "this one's fine for a minute. I'm just running in." Her voice had that syrupy condescension, the one that makes you feel small without them ever raising a finger. I remember the heat in my face, the frustration that does something odd to your chest when people treat your life like an inconvenience. "A minute is fine, but I have a disability and need to be able to park there," I said, trying to keep the anger out of my voice because everyone around us was watching. Her smile hardened. "Nobody's perfect," she said. "Maybe try being more flexible." She shoved her sunglasses back up and slammed the door. She didn't move. I watched through the glass as she walked inside with that slow, deliberate stride, like she'd just won a tiny battle. That should have been the last straw. Instead, it was the beginning of a pattern. Week after week, she'd park in my spot. Sometimes she was there 5 minutes. Sometimes she left the car for hours while she hosted book club meetings, landscaper consultations, or what I called Karen conferences in her living room where the blinds were always closed. People would complain to the HOA board. The board sent polite emails. "Please respect assigned parking." The emails always ended with the HOA's happy logo and the word community. Karen replied once to an email with a 3-paragraph response about harassment and targeting, which somehow included a timeline of all her charitable donations that I didn't ask about. The board, visibly uncomfortable, sent a softer email, a gentle reminder. Nothing changed. I tried other things. I left a note on her windshield once, not aggressive, just factual. Assigned accessible parking. Unauthorized vehicles will be towed at owner's expense. The next day, the note was gone and there was lipstick on my windshield where somebody had written, "Chill out." My neighbor Maria confronted her once in the hallway and got treated to a 5-minute lecture on civic responsibility and how to be a good neighbor from Karen, with examples from some community in Ohio thrown in for color. Maria came back in tears. I felt terrible. I made her do it, and then came the night that made me realize I couldn't keep relying on the HOA to do what it should have done. It was a rainy Thursday in late autumn. I'd had a long appointment across town and I was exhausted. I pulled into the lot and saw Karen's SUV occupying my spot, headlights on, water beating along the tinted windows. I rolled forward and tapped on her window through the rain. No response. I knocked. Nothing. I called the HOA office. Their automated message cheerfully told me to report by email. I called the non-emergency line. A recorded voice told me to hold, and then hold some more. I watched my minutes evaporate. That was the moment I decided to stop being nice. Not mean, not cruel, but decisive. I'm not a litigious man by nature. I don't make a hobby of escalations. But living with a disability teaches you that small inconveniences can become dangerous barriers. Waiting 10 minutes to get inside in pouring rain, carrying medical supplies, it's not a luxury. It's necessity. I had to protect my independence. I started researching. I read the HOA covenants until my eyes blurred. I called the city parking department to confirm tow laws for accessible spaces. I learned the exact wording the law used about official signage and disabled parking and what constituted proof of obstruction. I printed everything and taped it inside a folder. Then I bought a small, weatherproof camera. Nothing fancy, just a discreet device with night vision and a motion sensor. I set it up on the side of my building, hidden under the eaves, angled to get a clear view of my spot and the license plates of anyone who parked there. If she wanted a battle, I wanted evidence. Installing the camera felt like crossing a line I told myself I would never cross. There's a privacy concern, obviously, but I only trained the lens on the parking space, not on windows or porches. I thought about telling other neighbors, Maria, Louise, Mrs. Chen, but I knew things tend to leak, and the moment Karen suspected she'd be watched, she'd probably ramp it up. So I set it and let it run. The first night it recorded a delivery van that idled in the space for 40 minutes. The second night, a landscaper. The third night, the first time Karen parked there at midnight, came back at 2:30 a.m. and left without a single apology or note. The footage started like a slow drip of evidence. License plates, timestamps, and patterns. I began cataloging everything in a folder on my laptop with dates and short notes. I told myself I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it for fairness, for the right to come home without starting a fight. But in the quiet of my apartment, when I replayed her smug little grin walking past my spot, I felt something else swell up. An understandable anger that wanted more than an email or a passive-aggressive note. I wanted accountability. I wanted the kind of consequence that made her think twice before she treated someone like their life was a suggestion. The camera quietly recorded 3 months of behavior. It captured neighbor complaints, false accusations she made about other people, and every single time she left her car in my spot. It wasn't dramatic on day one. It built up slowly, the way injustices do. Small, repeated, corrosive. That's how a story becomes a legal case. One small wrong after another until the sum is undeniable. But evidence is not the same as justice. Evidence only helps you build a case. You still need to know what to do with it. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't have an easy plan. What I had was the footage, the law printouts, and a swelling feeling that this had to end. That first chapter of my fight was about learning, documenting, and steeling myself for the next step. I won't lie. Part of me hoped the HOA would step in after seeing the evidence. Another part knew they'd prefer a quiet life to a legal headache. And then one morning, I opened my laptop and realized something I hadn't expected. Karen wasn't just careless. She seemed to be escalating on purpose. The records showed patterns that looked like harassment. Blocking the spot right after I left, parking there on days I had medical appointments, once leaving the car for 9 hours when she knew I'd be back late. That's when I understood this wasn't about ignorance. It was about power. What happens next is where things get louder. What I did after that felt risky, but it was the only way to make sure my wheelchair, my independence, wasn't bargaining fodder for someone else's sense of entitlement. I packed the evidence, printed copies, and called the city department to double-check legal language. The next step would involve voices with badges and then voices with gavels. It would involve the police. It would involve a lawyer. It would involve consequences that cost more than a parking ticket. But that's for Chapter 2. I'll tell you how I moved from watching to acting, how the police first reacted, and how the neighborhood split the second the word lawsuit entered the gossip chain. Things were about to get worse, and, strangely, a whole lot clearer. I didn't sleep much after finishing the catalog of footage. It was strange. I had all the proof I needed, yet I still felt powerless. It wasn't just about a parking space anymore. It was about the silent message Karen sent every time she wedged her SUV into that painted blue rectangle. You don't matter. I woke up that morning with a decision burning in my chest. I wasn't going to ask anymore. I was going to act. That day started quietly. The neighborhood was still, the air cold enough to sting a little. I opened my blinds and, like clockwork, there it was. Karen's silver SUV, angled arrogantly in my spot, her back tires slightly over the line as if she owned every inch. No hurry, no guilt, no care. I watched her from my window, refusing to look guilty, her purse swinging on her shoulder, sunglasses already on. She looked satisfied, almost content, like she had won an invisible war I hadn't even signed up for. I could have gone down. I could have tapped on her window, argued, wasted breath, but I didn't. For the first time, I allowed the anger to stay quiet. I whispered to myself, "Not today. Today, I don't speak. Today, I document." I rolled over to my desk, opened my laptop, and clicked on the folder labeled Parking Violations, Karen. There were already 74 dated recordings. I spent the next 3 hours organizing them with timestamps, vehicle angles, screenshots of her license plate, and notes summarizing each violation. Some entries even included dialogue, because I had audio. From my phone recordings, me. "Ma'am, this is a disabled spot." Her. "Then be faster next time." Me. "It's reserved by law." Her. "I'm not moving. Deal with it." I didn't realize until I watched that clip again how calmly I had spoken, and how cruelly she had smiled before slamming the door. I transferred everything onto a USB drive, neatly labeled it, and slipped it into a plastic case. I've never handled evidence before, but I treated it like something sacred. By noon, I called the non-emergency police line again, not to complain, but to request an officer for an official violation report. There's a difference in tone when you're not asking for sympathy, but outlining a case. The officer arrived an hour later. Officer Ramirez, mid-30s, composed, eyes that immediately evaluated the scene without judgment. He walked toward me as I rolled up to meet him by the lot. "Are you the caller?" he asked. "Yes, sir. This is about repeated obstruction of a legally assigned disabled parking space." He looked toward the SUV. "Is that her vehicle?" "Yes, and this isn't the first time." "Do you have documentation?" I nodded. 3 months' worth. That one sentence made him pause. Most people come with anger. I came with evidence. That changes everything. I led him to my apartment and opened the folder. As he watched the footage, his posture shifted gradually, from polite attention to a kind of slow, professional disbelief. "You said this is the same person?" "Repeatedly?" he asked. "Same person, Karen Bennett, Unit 3C. He wrote her name down. "You've warned her?" "Many times. So have neighbors. The HOA sent 3 emails. He leaned back. "And she kept doing it." "I believe," I said carefully, "that she enjoys it." He glanced at me, not surprised. He'd seen this type before. "Entitlement isn't loud. It's patient." Officer Ramirez closed his notebook. "I can issue a citation today, maybe a tow warning, but from what I'm seeing, this goes beyond parking violations. I'm preparing for legal escalation," I said, the first time I'd said that out loud to anyone. He nodded slowly. "Then you'll need a civil attorney, and I'll file this officially. Obstruction of an ADA space is enforceable, especially with repeated intent." That word, intent, echoed in my mind. Intent turned this from inconvenience into harassment, and legally, harassment carries weight. Just then, the building door swung open. Karen stepped out. Her heels clicked on the pavement like a metronome of menace. She spotted the officer, adjusted her sunglasses, and approached with theatrical annoyance. "Oh my God," she scoffed. "Did you seriously call the police because of parking?" The officer remained calm. "Ma'am, is this your vehicle?" "It's a temporary situation," she snapped. "I live here. I'm unloading." He exaggerates these things. Officer Ramirez didn't flinch. "Ma'am, he has 3 months of recorded violations. This is a designated ADA space." She laughed right to his face. "Are you kidding? You're going to waste police resources on a parking tantrum?" In that moment, you could feel something shift. The officer's tone went from cooperative to ice cold. "Ma'am," he said, "blocking an ADA spot is not a tantrum. It's a federal violation. This is a recorded report." Her confidence faltered. She stepped back. "This is harassment. He's stalking me with cameras." I cut in quietly. "The camera faces the parking lot. Public view. Legal." She turned on me, voice shaking. "You think you can intimidate me with cops and cameras? You have no idea who you're dealing with." I looked her straight in the eyes. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with." Officer Ramirez wrote her a citation on the hood of his patrol car. She watched, stunned, speechless for once. When he placed it on her windshield, she tore it off, crumpling it in her fist. "This isn't over," she hissed. She didn't know how right she was. Because it wasn't over. It was only beginning. That night, something happened I didn't expect. A note slid under my door. No envelope. Just one line, written in a rushed scrawl. "Be careful. She's planning something." I stared at it, heart pounding. Someone else knew. Someone was warning me. Which meant Karen wasn't done fighting, and she was about to get desperate. Next chapter. The neighborhood starts taking sides, and Karen's retaliation turns from petty to dangerous. And finally, walk into a lawyer's office with one drive. That would change everything. I didn't realize how quiet my apartment was until I held that warning note in my hands. Be careful. She's planning something. No signature, no clue. Just silent proof that someone else had seen what I saw. That Karen's behavior wasn't just inconvenient. It was calculated. I folded the note and slipped it into my evidence folder. If someone in the building was brave enough to warn me silently, it meant things were shifting. People were watching now, and not everyone was on her side. The rest of that night I barely slept. My mind kept replaying her face when Officer Ramirez handed her that citation, disbelief melting into pure, simmering rage. Karen was the kind of person who didn't like to lose control, and I had just yanked it from her hands. The next morning, I woke to a sharp, metallic noise outside my window. Skirk. Clang. I moved to the blinds and looked down. Karen was standing at my assigned parking space with a can of silver spray paint, furiously covering the blue wheelchair symbol. She was vandalizing the symbol. The nerve. The lawlessness. It wasn't ignorance anymore. It was defiance. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and zoomed in. She finished destroying the symbol and then, without even glancing around, tossed the empty can into the bushes and walked off. It was almost ritualistic, a territorial claim. When I rolled outside, Maria was already there, hand over her mouth. "My God, she's gotten worse," Maria whispered. "She wants to erase the law itself," I said, staring at the ruined paint. That afternoon, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. The lobby was suddenly buzzing with voices. Whispers, complaints, cautious support. People had finally come out of their units, agendas in hand. Karen sat at the front, legs crossed, speaking for the board as though she was the board. "I am being harassed," she proclaimed. "I have lived peacefully until she didn't even use my name, began stalking me with cameras. This is targeted. This is discrimination." The room shifted. Uncomfortable eyes, unsure murmurs. I raised my hand calmly. I recorded public property. The camera faces the parking lot, not windows. And this, I held up my phone showing her spray painting the disabled symbol, is not harassment. It's evidence, gasps. Some people turned away. Some stared directly at Karen. A few, like Mrs. Chen, slowly shook their heads in disbelief. Karen stood abruptly. That paint was worn. I was helping the community. By removing a handicap symbol. I asked. She snapped back, "You don't own that space. No one owns anything here." Officer Ramirez's words echoed in my mind. Intent. That meeting ended without resolution. Not a vote, not a ruling. The board looked petrified, afraid to escalate, afraid to anger her. They held neutrality like a shield, even as she waged war. But neutrality is dangerous when harm is happening. That evening, the retaliation began. First, notes slid under my door. Stop harassing women. Be a man. Stop crying about parking. Move if you can't handle neighbors. Different handwriting. Same poison. Then came the keying of my van. A long, single scratch like a scar carved into the paint on the driver's side. Deep, deliberate. There were no cameras facing that side of the lot. And Karen, of course, had an alibi ready. She was at yoga. It didn't matter. I quietly photographed the damage. I didn't knock on her door. I didn't argue in hallways. I called a lawyer. His name was David Whitman, a disability rights attorney recommended by Officer Ramirez. When I rolled into his office, he looked at me, not with sympathy, but with seriousness. "What you're facing," he said after reviewing the footage, "isn't a parking dispute. It's systemic harassment motivated by disregard for your rights. This is a civil case with potential criminal threads." "I don't want revenge," I told him. "I want accountability," he nodded. "Then we'll build this right. No shouting, no threats, just legal consequence." He slid a legal pad across the table. "List every incident, every witness, and from today on, speak to her only through official channels. No more direct confrontation. When do we serve her?" I asked. He looked at the footage again. Karen, spray can in hand, eyes burning with arrogance. "When she thinks she's won." That line stayed with me. We were going to let her walk deeper into her own trap. Over the next week, I stayed silent. I avoided the lobby. I passed her in hallways without a word. That silence unnerved her more than any argument could. She expected anger. She didn't know how to interpret quiet. Then came the boiling point. One evening, I was returning from therapy when I saw flashing red and blue lights outside the complex. 2 police cruisers, a crowd, and at the center, Karen, crying, clutching her arm dramatically. I heard her voice carrying across the lot. "He threatened me. He said I'd regret messing with him. I'm scared for my life." Every head turned toward me as I approached, some sympathetic, most confused. Officer Ramirez was there. Again. He walked toward me, not as a friend. "As protocol, did you threaten her?" he asked. "No," I replied calmly. "I haven't spoken to her in 8 days." He nodded once. He already knew. "But procedure is procedure," Karen stormed forward. "He has cameras watching me. He's obsessed. This is hate." I looked at Officer Ramirez. "May I speak?" He gave a brief nod. "I have footage," I said. "Footage of vandalism, of damage, of verbal harassment. All of it, on record. And I have an attorney." Karen froze. "The legal notice," I added, "will be served soon." The crowd was silent. You could feel the tension snap like a worn rope. For the first time, I saw it. Fear in her eyes. Not guilt. Not remorse. Fear. She realized this wasn't a neighborly argument. This was turning into court. The day the legal letter was delivered, the entire building felt it. Not through word, through silence. A silence that settled like dust, clinging to railings, whispering through door cracks. It was the kind of quiet that happens when people know a storm has reached their doorstep. David, my lawyer, drafted it meticulously. Cease and desist for harassment. ADA violations and property damage, backed by 3 months of documented evidence and a civil claim warning. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't emotional. It was cold, precise, irrefutable. It was served at 7:42 a.m. The process server, a middle-aged woman with unreadable eyes, approached Karen's door with the envelope. I didn't witness it personally. Officer Ramirez had advised me to stay clear. But Maria saw everything. Karen opened the door in her robe, coffee in hand. She looked at the envelope, smiled as if it were a party invitation, and said, "What is this?" When the server replied, "You've been served," everything changed. Maria told me her smile dropped like a dead weight. That evening, I waited, not for confrontation and for her silence, because when someone like Karen goes quiet, it means she's planning. Hours passed with no door slamming, no shouting, no SUV screeching into the lot, just stillness, like the air before a tornado. Around 9 p.m., I heard faint footsteps approaching my door. Then, tap, a single knock, slow, deliberate. I opened it. Karen stood there, not furious, not snarling, smiling, a soft, eerie smile. "Ahmed," she began, her voice dripping honey, "we don't have to do this. Let's talk like neighbors." I said nothing. She stepped closer. "I didn't know it meant this much to you. A parking space? Really? You could have just asked nicer." I stared at her, calm, silent. She continued, eyes shining with the confidence of manipulation. "You're making a mistake getting lawyers involved. These things can get ugly, and I'd hate for people to think you're unstable." There it was, the threat behind the smile. "Are you threatening me?" I asked quietly. She laughed. "No, I'm warning you. This could go both ways. I have friends on the board. Influences. You don't want to make enemies." "Karen," I replied, my voice measured. "The law doesn't care about influence." Her face pinched, briefly, a twitch of true self. But she recovered. "You'll regret this," she whispered, and she walked away. The next morning, chaos began. HOA board email, public notice. "A formal legal complaint has been issued by a resident. We urge all neighbors to remain civil and refrain from involvement pending legal advice." They didn't name me. They didn't name her, but everyone knew, and the building split overnight. Neighbors I'd known for years, who'd smiled, nodded, exchanged greetings, now chose sides without saying a word. Some knocked on my door quietly, offering whispered encouragement, like Mrs. Chen, who brought me steamed buns and said, "You're brave." Most suffer in silence. Others avoided my eyes in the hallway, afraid of office complaints, gossip, backlash, and some, a very small, but loud group, flocked to Karen like flies to honey. They believed her side, or they feared being her enemy. By the end of the week, Karen had already begun rewriting the narrative. Flyers appeared on the lobby board, unsigned but obvious. "Don't let one person turn our community toxic. We're all equals, no special privileges. Stop secret filming. Stop harassment." I photographed them. Evidence. I didn't tear them down. I didn't respond. The next step was no longer mine. It was legal. A week later, my lawyer filed the first official court notice, civil suit for harassment, ADA obstruction, property damage, and emotional distress damages estimate. $87,000, costs far beyond a car. I still remember the feeling of signing that document. Not victory, not vengeance. Control. For the first time, I was defining the story, but Karen wasn't done. No, she had one more play, the dirtiest card in her deck. She called the police. On me, it happened late on a Friday night. A sharp pounding at my door. I opened it to find two officers, not Ramirez, staring grimly. "Sir, we've received a report of you threatening a resident with violence." A cold, deliberate lie. Karen stood behind them, clutching a tissue, eyes red with fake tears. "He said he would destroy me," she whimpered. I'm scared for my safety. I could see it then. She was trying to build her own case, to paint me as unstable, dangerous, a threat. I looked at the officers and said calmly, I have cameras. Every interaction is documented. I haven't spoken to her since she was served. The officers exchanged a look. Do you have that footage available? Yes, I said. Would you like to see 8 days of silence? Karen froze. Panic flickered. She had expected rage. I gave them my lawyer's card and said 7 words she never expected. From now on, speak through legal counsel. One officer nodded. Understood, sir. They turned to Karen. Ma'am, we advise you to cease contact until this is resolved in court, she stammered. This isn't... But they walked away, leaving her confronting a truth she never believed possible. Her power meant nothing here. It was no longer a neighborhood conflict, it was a legal reckoning, and she was losing ground fast. I always thought silence was my greatest weapon against her. But I learned something during those weeks. Silence is powerful only when backed by truth. And truth was the one thing Karen couldn't manipulate anymore. Not with flyers, not with gossip, not even with tears. After the police left that night, I sat in my living room with the lights off, staring at the stack of legal papers on my table. My hands weren't shaking. My breathing was steady. Karen had played her final emotional card, the helpless victim, and it failed. The following days passed strangely calm, like the eye of a storm. Karen didn't knock. She didn't park in my space. She didn't look in my direction. But everyone around us felt the tension coiling tighter, waiting to snap. Then depositions began. David, my attorney, called me into his office. The walls were lined with neatly framed certificates, but his desk was pure battlefield. Folders, statements, timestamps, photographs of my scratched van, screenshots of her SUV in my space, everything cataloged like a war diary. She'll bring representation, David said. She'll try to justify, minimize, possibly cry. I don't care if she cries, I replied. I just want her held accountable. When we're done, he said, she'll pay something more valuable than money, reputation. It was a bold promise, and bold promises only matter when backed by evidence. We had that. What we didn't know was how deep she'd buried herself. On the day of her deposition, I entered the building through the side ramp. The receptionist nodded. She knew. Everyone did. When I rolled into that sterile conference room, Karen was already seated with her attorney, a sharp-suited man who looked like he charged by the minute for breathing. She didn't look back at me. She kept her eyes on a bottle of water, twisting the cap over and over. David leaned in and whispered, "Watch her hands. Confidence speaks through fingers." Her fingers trembled. It began. "Mrs. Bennett," David said, voice calm, "have you ever parked in a designated handicapped space assigned to my client?" She smiled mechanically. "Occasionally, only when it was convenient. It's not like he was always there." "With your knowledge that it was reserved under ADA regulation?" "It's just paint," she shrugged. "Besides, nobody enforces it." A sentence that landed like a hammer. "Next question. Did you ever receive notice from the HOA instructing you to stop?" She crossed her arms. "Others park there too. Why am I being singled out?" David didn't blink. "Is it harassment to expect laws to be followed?" Silence. My attorney slid a file across the table. Inside were printed still frames, her SUV, day after day, timestamps burned in the bottom corner, then the photograph of the vandalized symbol. For the first time, Karen's composure faltered. Her attorney whispered something, but she shook her head and muttered, "It was already fading. I was helping repaint?" David leaned forward. "With spray paint?" She hesitated. Just a second. Just long enough. That was the moment she lost. Because a lie spoken under oath is no longer arrogance. It's perjury. We didn't need to press further. We had what we came for: denial, contradiction, false intent. As we prepared to leave, she finally looked at me. "Why couldn't you just come talk to me?" she asked softly, almost whispering. I met her eyes. I did, many times. Talking wasn't the problem. Listening was. She looked away. I saw it then. Not regret, not remorse. Humiliation. On the ride home, my phone buzzed. Messages from neighbors who'd never spoken to me directly about it before. "Maria, we're proud of you." "Luis, she's been bullying for years. You finally stopped her." "Mrs. Chen, if you need a witness, I speak." That last one stayed with me. I speak, because that's what this was ultimately about. Speaking, not shouting, not fighting in parking lots. Speaking through proof, through law, through unshakable, undeniable truth. But there was one final reckoning ahead. The HOA Emergency Assembly, a room full of neighbors. A board forced to choose a side. Karen cornered not by anger, but consequences. She would try one last stunt, something ugly, and she would do it in front of everyone. What happened in that meeting changed everything, and it ended her reign more brutally than any lawsuit could. The night of the HOA assembly felt heavier than any courtroom. Courtrooms follow rules, but neighborhood halls, those are ruled by opinion and whispers. When I arrived, early, the room was mostly empty except for chairs lined in uneven rows and a folding table where 3 board members sat flipping pages. There was no stage, no microphone, just hard fluorescent lights and hard truths waiting to surface. I positioned myself along the right wall, near the ramp. People trickled in. Some smiled weakly at me, others avoided eye contact altogether. Guilt makes people quiet. Shame keeps them seated. I didn't expect her to walk in early, but she did. Karen entered with her husband, someone who had never once been involved in her conflicts. Tall, stiff, arms crossed. He looked like a man suddenly aware that his world had been operating with unspoken truths he never knew existed. She didn't look at me. The meeting opened with routine agenda nonsense. Lawn budgets, holiday decorations, motion approvals, all background noise. Everyone knew why they were really here. Then Mrs. Patel, the board president, cleared her throat. "We have one final item. An ongoing resident dispute that has escalated into legal action." Heads turned toward me, then toward her. Karen stood before she was even called. She wanted control. She wanted the narrative first. "I'd like to clarify something," she said loudly. "This entire situation has been blown out of proportion. I am being painted as a monster for something that wasn't malicious. The space was often empty. I made a mistake, yes, but this man," she gestured toward me without looking, "is using the law to punish me." A few uncomfortable shifts. Her husband stared at the floor. She continued, voice rising, emotions trembling between anger and desperation. "I've lived here for 12 years. I've served on holiday committees. I've watched your children. And now I'm being dragged through court like a criminal. For parking. Parking!" She paused, expecting applause. Sympathy. Something. Silence. Mrs. Patel interlaced her fingers. "Thank you, Karen. Now we will allow the affected resident to speak." I didn't move to the front. I didn't need to. My voice didn't need volume. Truth doesn't require it. "I asked for one thing," I began slowly. "A space, marked, legal, mine, not for privilege, for necessity." Every face was watching now. "For weeks," I asked nicely. I asked calmly, "until I found my van keyed, until I found the symbol that gives me access, erased." A ripple spread across the room. I looked at Karen. She shifted. "I didn't sue for revenge. I sued because without rules, people like me disappear. Not physically, socially. We vanish behind shrugs and excuses." Nobody blinked. She says it was just parking. But every act of disrespect starts with just parking, just words, just a joke, until it costs someone everything. Then I stopped. No drama, no outburst, just silence, and that silence condemned her more than any evidence. Mrs. Patel nodded solemnly. We have reviewed the footage, the vandalism report, and police documentation. As of tonight, the HOA formally bans Karen Bennett from using any community board authority and places her under probation for violation of federal ADA compliance. We also issue full public apology requirement and financial restitution for damages. Karen's mouth fell open. You can't. I'm a founding member. This community, Mrs. Patel said coldly, was built for neighbors, not rulers. Karen looked around desperately, searching for a single ally. Not one pair of eyes met hers. Her husband stood quietly and walked out without waiting for her. She stayed frozen, a queen dethroned in front of her own court. Minutes later, the room emptied, but she stayed seated, staring at nothing. For a moment, I saw something rare in her. Not anger, loss, not of money, not status. Control. As I rolled past her toward the exit, she finally looked up. I never hated you, she whispered. I stopped. That was the problem, I replied softly. Hate would have meant you saw me. I left her there. Outside, the night air felt different, lighter, not victorious, just honest. No cheers, no triumph. Just peace. True justice is quiet. Weeks later, I received a check. Damages, legal fees, an apology letter, clearly written by her attorney, signed by her trembling hand. I didn't frame it. I kept it in a drawer, not as a trophy, but as proof. That silence, backed by truth, can roar louder than rage, and that even in the smallest battles, like a parking space, dignity is worth defending. Because some lines, like that blue one on the pavement, are not paint. They are boundaries.